This is lumber stores, so they sort all the inbound lumber and check for moisture. The grader stands here as the boards come down the chute, puts a grade mark on every board based on density of the wood, knot size, and straightness of the grain. And then we have lumber pullers who pull it into different piles depending on the grade mark on the board. So we've got our face ply pile. These are our prettiest and strongest boards. Then we have the next few boards that go in our beam, just inside the face ply. And then we have our body of our beam next. Let's go see if they're gluing, otherwise we'll go to lumber prep. So the lumber that they sort gets brought up here as they call for it, and it staged, and this is what they're gonna do today. Then it goes onto the scissor lift, and they run it across into the scarfer. They fill the buckets with the boards. The one end gets glue, and both ends get finger joint scarfed on them. So it's the same as the other side, but he's got a glue head, so it trims, it scarfs, and then it spreads glue. After they're scarfed, they'll come down the chute and they'll go through the board separator. So this is the makeup area. The jump belts grab one board at a time, side clamp it so they're straight up against the fence. As they make up, you got pressure plates that make sure that they're put together correctly so they're not offset one way or another. And then the boards travel through the tunnel. In this tunnel, they're exposed to radio frequency waves, which helps cure the glue. They're running white glue, so they need to get those fingers up to about 200 degrees or higher. The radio frequency is kind of like a microwave, just a different frequency. It's not microwaves, it's radio waves. As the board goes through the planer, it's taking it down from 1.5 inches to 1 3/8 inches, roughly taking a 1/16 of an inch off of each side. You have your RF operator who's monitoring the makeup area. He can see on the camera the bottom of the board to make sure that the planer's not skipping. He enters in the desired length for the saw to cut, and the machine will just cut as it gets that long. He's able to monitor his radio frequency to make sure his generators are working. As the plies cut, the RF operator will watch it go down the rollers and make sure that it stacks properly on the lift. So right now he's checking the side to side of the board and making sure that it's the correct thickness on both sides. That's a finger joint. So these are two different boards. You got your finger joint right there. The RF operator also breaks a couple boards every so often to judge the wood failure versus glue failure. We want to see the wood fail, not the glue. They're getting lined up, making sure they got enough people to run the beam. So it's a big one. They can't stop once they get going. So they're doing all the prep work now to make sure everything's set up properly. So it's going to be a side layout beam that's 72 feet long. We're gluing it up as a 2x18. It's gonna finish around 16 inches. So we've got a 2x8 and a 2x10. They got 2 stacks to get the depth we need. They've got, the first stack is on the lift and the second stack is staged. The stack on the lift, they'll flip one board down on the conveyor belt. It's gonna run out under the glue head down the rollers, and the guys will bring it into the form. They've got hookers in behind the form that'll hold the beam so it doesn't tip over as they're gluing. So this beam is just under 12,500 board feet, and it's gonna weigh just over 22,000 pounds. So that's our face ply. That's the densest and strongest board. We paint it red to indicate that that's the face ply, so it doesn't get mixed up and put in the wrong spot. Right now they're lining it up to make sure that it's hanging evenly from this end to the other end. So the guys up front have to be careful to make sure that they don't get hit by the board, and they gotta watch and make sure that there's not a guy out front when they slide it down the arms or when they carry it. They're also looking at each other to make sure they're walking together so that it goes smoothly. The first guy in line lines them up so that one end's straight. So you can see without the hookers holding their hooks, that whole thing would tip over and it'd be a mess. They're wearing steel-toed boots with Met guards. And then they got uniforms that a third-party company washes. The glues comprise of 2 chemicals that once they mix together, it makes the glue. And so we provide uniforms to the gluers just so they don't track that stuff home to their kids. I'd say we're 75% of it run. And then they still have to throw straps and clamps and wrench it up and stomp it down. The jacks are every 16 inches on center, and that guarantees even pressure throughout the entire beam. You got your glue machine operator way at the end. He's making sure his one product's getting down into the chute, and so he was stirring it. Here he's gonna add more slurry, which is the hardening part of the glue. It's his job to keep an eye on that to make sure he's got plenty of slurry and resin in his machine. He's using a slow slurry, so we got an idea that the glue's gonna get hard anywhere from 70 to 80 minutes. So we're working under a time constraint. So they gotta make sure that it's lined up properly. They only got 2 inches of trim on each end. So when the finishing department gets it and they lay it out, they'll cut roughly 2 inches off of each end. So if the end gets crazy and it's not square, we got a problem. Because you can't glue it longer. So he blocked that out to make sure he had bolt. If you bottom that bolt out, you don't know if you got enough pressure. And then they're putting 2 clips under the clamp to raise the pressure up. You need the pressure in the center of the beam. Otherwise it throws it out of square. I'm good. So he's applying down pressure after it's been tightened about halfway to close up all those gaps. That's about 60, 70 pounds. So then they label the beam with the job number and the mark number, so when finishing gets it, they know what it is. So this is job 10724, beam 101B1. So then they can go to the blueprint and figure out how do we cut and drill beam 101B1. Once this beam gets out in the field and it's erected and you look at it, this will be the part you see. And that'll have the roof. So after the beams sit all night in the forms, they're torn out and staged here for the finishing department. The finishing department will then pick the ones they need to work and run them through the planer. These are 9¼ inches right now, and they'll go through the planer and finish at roughly 8½, depending on the customer's specifications. So these beams came out of the planer and are now to size, smooth on top and bottom. After they're planed, they get staged on horses and are laid out and then worked. So our fabricator lays them out and indicates where they need to be cut, holes drilled. Quite often we make a lot of the same beam, so once we get one cut, we use it as a pattern. So we've got a handful of large floor saws that the fabricators will use to cut, and then we also have big heavy-duty sanders that will run across the top of the beam prior to staining. Yeah, these are counterboards so that the hardware doesn't stick out, it all stays flush. And then they'll probably go over with a plug and cover up the hardware. So after the beams are finished, they're wrapped and bundled together to be loaded onto a truck. We wrap them individually so that they can handle them on the job site without getting them damaged by the weather.